So in the past, in the course, we've focused on activities for our screens, but there is another method, and that's to use fragments. So in this friends list fragment class that we're going to create, we'll be using those fragments. But let's start with a basic question. Fragments, let's go over what a fragment is before we actually dive into the code. In order to understand what a fragment is, it's probably good to get a recap on how regular activities work. Now, we've used activities, you've seen that in numerous apps where we've created an app to do something, and it's basically got an activity, for example, main activity, which is the main sort of launching mechanism for an app, and we use an intent to go to another activity. So you can see that the activity 1 uses an intent and goes to activity 2, and then if there's a back button or a way to go back to activity 1. So that's the mechanism, and each screen or each activity is separate in and of itself. Nothing new there. But fragments, let's talk about what fragments are and the differences. Fragments work, as you can see on the screen now, you can have multiple fragments sort of relating to an activity. So fragments are part of the overall user interface and are very flexible, giving you the ability to do all sorts of cool things and really to break up what you see on the screen into different pieces, as you can see there. So some of the things you can do with fragments, you can activate and deactivate chunks. That's fragments anytime. So in other words, take something off the screen and put it back on again. And a fragment can have its own, or has its own life cycle. It can process its own events. And importantly, you do not need to navigate to another activity. The fragment is literally just a way of sort of saying, show this fragment on the screen, and there's no navigation that takes place. And just out of interest, fragments were introduced in Android Honeycomb, but the support library that's included allows you to target older devices. So in other words, you can use that cool functionality if you're targeting older devices as well. So what we're going to use it for, we're going to use a fragment for our list view to display our friends on the screen in a format that we can see the details, and then we'll have access to edit and delete, which we'll use intents. So think of this as an introduction to fragments. You can sort of see how a fragment has got a life cycle of its own, as I've said, or of course how to actually develop them. So let's get into the code now. We're actually going to develop our friends list fragment class. Okay, so let's create our friends list fragment class. We're going to do a new class. We're going to call this friends list fragment. Friends list fragment. And what we need to do here, let's make a bit more space. We need to extend a list fragment. List fragment is a special type of fragment. And again, you'll make more sense when we see a bit more of it. Extends, that should be. But also, you can see it's come up with a choice there. And it is important to use the right one. And so I'm just going to select my option. Make sure you use the android.support.v4.app. Anytime we've got a list, an option throughout this entire class that we're creating, use the support.v4 one. And that's to make sure that the app that we're creating will work on older devices. So I'm going to select that. But also, we're going to implement Loader Manager. Remember, we've talked about Loader Manager before. Loader callbacks. And we're going to implement that for list friends. Actually, it's a typo. It should be friend, of course, because that's the class we created recently. I'll just tidy that up a little bit. So we're going to implement the class that does a list fragment, but it's also going to get the callbacks from our loader manager. So in other words, the loader manager class, the friends list loader that we created, it's going to be calling back this class and sending the data, which of course is the friends data from the content provider, which of course is getting its data from the SQLite. So it's going to be calling back and sort of saying, here's the data, so we can then access that and put that on the screen in here. And so you get a really good understanding of the loader mechanism. And of course, we've got some errors on the screen at the moment we need to implement. So firstly, we'll do a static final string just for a logcat. Okay, we've done that before. We also need to have an adapter. Now, we haven't actually written this class yet, so obviously we're going to get an error, but the name of the class is Friends Custom Adapter. And we're going to be writing that as the next class after this. So obviously at the moment, we're going to be getting an error. Next, we need to assign a unique ID for our loader. We're just going to do a static final, and we're going to just have the value of 1. So you'll see where this is used shortly. We'll just call it loader ID, and we'll make it the value of 1. We need a content resolver. And we need somewhere to store the data. So we're going to do a list friend mFriends. Alright, so we're going to overwrite some functions. On activity create will be the first one. Sorry, on activity created. So what we need to do is do some processing in there. So we're going to leave the super on there. We've got a menu, so we're going to put set has options menu true. Of course, we haven't implemented that, but we will be doing that. We're going to assign our content resolver. We'll do a get activity dot get content resolver. Now this is going to be the code for our adapter, which of course isn't implemented yet. It's going to be equals new friends custom adapter get activity and something called get child fragment manager. Now a child fragment manager, or the fragment manager, is a mechanism that's going to control it. It allows us to control the adapters on the screen. So by setting that to the custom adapter, it's got the mechanism to actually sort of to update the fragments that are in this class. But again, it'll make more sense once you see it and it's all put together. Okay, so that's mAdapter. We want a default message when there's no records that we'll see on the screen. And we'll just put no friends, which is a sad state of affairs. And we need to set our list adapter to mAdapter, which again, of course, won't work until we implement it. And set list shown, we're going to set that to false. And we're setting that to false because we're going to wait until we get some data back from the process, from the loader, before we actually show anything. So that's why we're setting that to false. Lastly, the important line, we need to initialize, the loader manager. So get loader manager dot init, our unique ID, loader underscore ID, null, and this. And we just have a look at the documentation to make it clear what we're doing. You can see the first option there is a unique identifier for this loader. It can be whatever you want. And basically, because we've only got this loader we're working on, we're going to assign it to the value of 1. But it can literally be whatever you want. Now, there's optional arguments to supply to the loader at construction, but we don't need any of those. And that's why we're passing null, which is the second parameter. The third parameter is the callback. It's basically saying where are we going to send the callbacks to. And by sending this, what we're saying is to the loader manager, when it comes time to call back and to send us the results, use this class. So that's what that is all about. Okay, and that's the on activity created method. And I'm not sure what happened with that nullable, but I'm going to get rid of that. I don't really need that. Okay, moving on. The next thing we want to do, we need to override another function, and that's the on create loader. So I'm going to do override on create loader. There's that one there. So we need to basically get it to start working, because at the moment we've set it up to say start initializing, but now we need to actually put the code in to do the creation, to actually sort of literally create the loader. So to do that first, we need a content resolver. Probably don't need to do this again, but we'll do it just to be sure, because it's probably already been executed in the previous step. But we'll do it anyway, content resolver. Then we need to return new friends list loader. Of course, we wrote that in the previous video. We're going to pass get activity. Then we're going to pass friends contract.URI table. That's a URI. That's a URI shortcut we created. Then we're going to pass our content resolver as well from this class. So that's the mechanism to create the loader now. Then of course the next thing we need to create is onload finished. So we've got the mechanisms to create it, but we need to do some processing after it's created. So I'm going to override that, onload finished. We're going to set the adapter. So this is after it's been created. madapter.setData. And it's not going to work at the moment because, again, we haven't created it. We'll call it friends so it makes more sense. It's a list of friends. mFriends equals friends. Now we put if we're resuming, so if we're coming back from a resume and we're not creating it for the first time, then we want to actually show the list this time. So we set list shown, true. Else, set list, no animation, true. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. So that's now the mechanism for when the load's finished. And of course, we've talked about this in other videos, but the reset, we also need to cover that. And that's the overriding another method, and that one's going to be called, or is called, onLoader reset. So we need to set madapter.setData to null because it's been a reset. So we need to basically delete the data that's in the data set. And that's literally it. So that's the friends list fragment. So there's a lot of sort of setup functionality you can see there. There's callback code and so forth, but there's not a lot else yet. And that's because a lot of the work is going to be done by the custom adapter. Now we have got an error here, and the reason we've got an error is got to do with the imports. It's very important to make sure we're using the right imports. And I think if we have a look at some of these loaders, we'll find that we're not using the right ones. So just to confirm that, I'm going to actually delete Loader Manager and Loader. And you'll see it's going to come up with multiple choices. So if you get this error, this is how you fix it. So we're going to import class, but this time we're going to select the right one. Again, remember I said earlier, support.v4.app. So if you're getting funny errors, make sure you've selected the v4.app because otherwise you'll have all sorts of weird issues. You can see now the import has now correctly loaded the, or imported I should say, v4.content.loader and v4.app.loader-manager. So the only errors we should have now are to do with the friends custom adapter, which again we haven't created yet. And that there, looking down that list of errors there, that error there has got to do with the friends list loader. We've incorrectly done an import there by the look. You can see it's actually telling what the error is. It's looking for an android.support.v4.content.loader. So if we go back to our friends list loader and look at our imports, and we'll get rid of that one. And this time we'll have a look at the multiple choices. We'll see again on the screen there's support.v4.content in a single task loader. So again, I find Android Studio does have a little bit of a problem with this sometimes and imports things automatically, even though there's two choices. So if you are getting weird errors, make sure that you carefully check the imports against the source code to make sure that the problems are sorted that way and you're using the right imports, because you will get those errors until that's actually added. So just looking through our list again to make sure we've got everything done. The only errors we should really end up with at this stage are to do with the adapter, which we haven't created. You can see that's really the only errors that are left there now. So I'm going to finish this video here, and in the next video we're going to start implementing the Friends custom adapter.